Bear down, fam. 4 days out from final cuts, a starting D lineman for the Bears, a guy who played all 17 games last year, is in active trade talks right now, per Jordan Schultz. In a bit, I'll break down what Ryan Poles is actually asking for in return and why that number's got me split down the middle. Meanwhile, Ben Johnson dropped a new chapter line for 2026, and I'll tell you why I buy it and why I'm putting an asterisk on it too. And to close it out, Niffy Sewell's season-ending injury just kicked off a domino effect that could leave the Bears' secondary green as grass for Week 1. Hollis Hall is heating up. Okay, man, let's stop right here for a second, because this is not one of those generic rumors that pops up every August about a guy in the last year of his deal potentially getting moved. This is a report from Jordan Schultz, who is not just some random voice on social media saying the Bears have had active trade conversations about Gervin Dexter, and that there are, quote, multiple scenarios where a deal could get done. Let's go to the facts first, because you need to understand who this player is before we get into whether this makes sense or not. Dexter came to Chicago in the 2023 draft, taken in the second round, pick number 53, out of Florida. He is 24 years old. Last season, he played all 17 games of the regular season, which for an interior defensive lineman is no small thing, because that position wears you down snap after snap. He finished with 44 tackles, 6 sacks, which put him second on the team behind Montez Sweat, and 2 forced fumble recoveries. That is a player who produces. We are not talking about a bench piece nobody would miss. And here's the contract piece that makes this make sense from the business side. Dexter is entering the final year of his rookie deal, a 4-year contract worth $6.72 million total. His cap hit in 2026 is just $2.14 million, with a base salary of a little over $1.5 million. There's no reported extension talk on the table. That means if the Bears do nothing, Dexter walks into free agency in 2027 and they get nothing back for him. That kind of contract situation is exactly what lights up trade rumors every August, because the front office starts running the math. Is this player worth more playing one more year for us, or is he worth more as trade capital right now? Now, the tactical reasoning behind this is really what interests me, because this is where Dennis Allen's work as defensive coordinator comes in. Allen's scheme prioritizes quick, explosive interior tackles, guys who can shoot the gap before the center or the guard finishes their set. Dexter, being honest, is not that profile. He is more of a power player than an explosive one, more of a space eater than a one-gap penetrator. And the numbers back that up in a way I had not seen laid out this clearly before. 43 total pressures on the season, which ranks him 20th among all interior defensive tackles in the league. That is not a bad number, but it is also not the number of a player who is dominating his coordinator's scheme. And there is a third factor almost nobody is talking about enough. The Bears head into 2027 with only 6 draft picks. 6. For a team that is still building depth on both lines, that is a genuinely concerning amount of capital. So when you hear that Poles is on active calls reportedly asking for a 3rd-round pick as a floor and potentially open to a 2nd if somebody gets generous, you understand the full logic here. This is not only about scheme fit. It is about scheme fit plus a front office that needs draft ammunition for next year. Now, my opinion, and I want to be honest here because this is not as simple as good trade or bad trade. If the actual return ends up being just a 3rd-round pick, to me that is selling low. A guy who played all 17 games, who was the 2nd-best sack producer on your defensive line, who is still only 24 years old, is worth more than a 3rd-rounder in a market where the league-wide demand for interior linemen who can generate pressure is sky high right now. If Poles gets a 2nd-round pick, then yes, that is smart front office work. You cash in on a player's peak value before you lose him for nothing in 2027, and you turn that into capital for positions where you actually have real holes, like the edge or the secondary. But here's the part that genuinely bugs me, and I want you to think about this with me. If the real problem is that Dexter does not fit Dennis Allen's scheme, that is a conversation that should have happened back in the offseason, not during cutdown week. Because if you knew back in March that this player profile does not work in your defense, you had 6 months to shop him with more time and more leverage. Doing it now, against the clock, with every team in the league knowing you're in a hurry, is exactly the kind of situation where you end up settling for less than the player is actually worth. That is not on Dexter. That is a potential planning failure on the coaching staff's part. With all that said, this is still a rumor about conversations, not a confirmed trade. Nobody has named specific teams yet in this report, and multiple scenarios can mean exactly that. Several possibilities that are still far from getting done. But when an insider at Schultz's level drops this during cutdown week, you know as well as I do, there is fire behind that smoke. I would be watching the October trade deadline with an eyebrow raised if this does not get resolved in the next few days. And there is one more piece of this puzzle that connects straight into the roster segment coming up later. If Dexter walks, the guy standing right there ready to take the spot is Jordan Vandenberg, a 6th-round defensive tackle from this year's draft class. His story has me hooked. He came out of high school with 0 college offers, went the junior college route, and worked his way to the NFL the long way. Ben Johnson has already said he is firmly in the mix for a starting job, and Grady Jarrett, the $43 million veteran lining up next to him, has taken him under his wing and been coaching him up on the sideline during games. If the Dexter trade closes before the season opener against Carolina on September 13th, Vandenberg likely steps in as a Week 1 starter. And honestly, even without a trade, this kid is earning that spot on merit alone based on what he showed in camp. That is the part of this story that actually gives me hope in the middle of all the noise. This is not just the Bears selling off an asset. They have a real answer already sitting on the roster, and that changes how you should read this whole rumor. Okay, fam, I needed that cold contract and scheme breakdown, but now let's get into something that hits me right in the chest, because it has to do with the identity of this team under Ben Johnson. This week, right in the middle of all the cut-down noise, Johnson put out a message that got traction fast with the Chicago media, that the Bears are writing a new chapter in 2026. And look, normally when a head coach says a line like that in August, I automatically file it under preseason cliche and move on. But when you hear the full context of what he actually said, there is something more solid there. Johnson put it this way, and I am quoting directly, "This is our chance to forge our identity. This is where it all happens." And then, speaking specifically about the current roster, we've got a whole different group of guys than we did a year ago, and this is where it gets fun. That second comment is the one I want to dig into, because it is not a small detail. This year's camp opened with 54 returning players from last year's roster and 37 new faces. 37. That is more than a third of the roster being completely different from the group Johnson used to win the division last year in his first season at the helm. And he himself was honest about it in a way I appreciated. He said it starts all over again, that they talked about this the moment last season ended, that it is a brand new group and that they are, quote, in a race right now to develop the same chemistry that we had a year ago. A race. That word is not an accident. A coach does not talk about racing against the clock to build chemistry unless he genuinely feels the pressure of that clock working against him before the first regular season game. He also talked about camp being a hard, demanding test, saying word for word that anything worth doing is going to be challenging. And he even mentioned something that struck me as genuine and not rehearsed, that preseason road trips, no family, just the team and the hotel, are a real opportunity to build bonds among the guys. Now, my honest take on all of this, because I do not want to just repeat the press release back to you like it is a guaranteed win. On one hand, Johnson has earned the benefit of the doubt. What he did in year 1, transforming the culture of a locker room we had spent a decade describing as the quarterback graveyard, and taking this team to a division title, is a real, measurable, undeniable accomplishment. When that kind of coach tells you he is building something intentional, you have to listen with respect. But, and here's my asterisk, 37 new players is a level of turnover that in any other context would set off serious alarms about continuity. Winning locker room chemistry does not automatically carry over just because the head coach and the system stay the same. Internal leadership, unwritten hierarchies, the way a group communicates in the huddle under fourth quarter pressure, all of that gets built through shared time. And a third of this roster has not had that shared time yet. So my real read is this. The new chapter message is genuine in Johnson's intent, but it is also strategically convenient. If the standard dips a little early in the season while the new roster pieces gel, that line is already planted as the official explanation. I am not saying that with cynicism. I am saying it with the respect of someone who has watched enough football to recognize when a coach is managing expectations smartly, not just motivating for the sake of motivating. And to close things out, man, let's get into the roster, because while everybody was talking about Dexter and Ben Johnson, the team was putting out fires at 2 different positions at the same time, and this is going to define real depth heading into Week 1. Let's start at linebacker. On Tuesday, the Bears placed Nephi Sewell, brother of Noah Sewell, on season-ending injured reserve, following a right leg injury he suffered in the preseason game against Cincinnati. This comes after Sewell had already left the Cleveland game with a concussion, a protocol he had actually cleared before facing the Bengals. 2 separate hits in 2 separate weeks, and the second one cost him the entire season. As the corresponding move, the Bears signed Antonio Grier Jr., a 2026 UFL champion with the Louisville Kings, a player who, in his 7 regular season appearances in that league, racked up 15 tackles, 3 pass breakups, and a 47-yard interception return. Not a name that is going to move the needle immediately, but a real depth piece with recent production behind it. And in that same announcement, the Bears activated linebacker Keyshawn Elliott and safety Elijah Hicks off the physically unable to perform list. This is the part I find most relevant for roster analysis. Elliott's activation strongly suggests there is already a spot reserved for him on the final 53-man roster. With Devin Bush, TJ, Edwards, and DeMarco Jackson already locked in as starters, That leaves Jack Sanborn, Ruben Hippolyte II, and Tony Fields II fighting over what is probably just 1 or 2 spots now, with less margin than they had a week ago. Now, the secondary has its own drama, and this is one we have been tracking closely. Terrell Smith, the cornerback taken in the 5th round of the 2023 draft, is projected to be cut according to ESPN's Courtney Cronin roster projection. And the reason is painfully simple. This guy cannot stay healthy. Last year, he suffered a torn patellar tendon that cost him the entire season. And now, this August, he suffered another injury on the 3rd of the month that sidelined him for roughly 3 weeks, only returning on the 25th of August, basically at the last minute. The player positioned to take that spot is Dante Manning, coming off last year's practice squad. Cronin predicted Manning holds onto that final cornerback spot ahead of Beanie Bishop Jr., who is going to start the season suspended for the first 3 games anyway, and ahead of Smith. But, and this needs to be said honestly, in the second preseason game, Cincinnati's offense targeted Manning directly, which raises legitimate questions about whether he is ready for that level of competition. My read on this whole roster picture, tying all 3 pieces together. This is exactly the kind of thin margin Poles built this roster on, betting on depth by volume instead of established names at certain spots. And right now, that bet is being tested by real injuries, not hypothetical ones, with Bishop starting suspended and Smith likely off the roster. The 5th or 6th cornerback stepping in during Week 1 against Minnesota could be a player with 0 real regular season NFL experience. That, honestly, makes me a little nervous. Not panic level, but enough to say this is a position worth watching closely over the next 2 weeks. Because the gap between enough depth and a real Week 1 problem is thinner than I would like. Final roster cuts land this coming Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, with the last preseason game this Saturday, against the Titans serving as the last real evaluation window for several of these bubble names. And there you have it, fam. 3 stories, 3 completely different angles, and all 3 pointing at the same underlying question. Is this roster ready to defend what Ben Johnson built last year? We have got a starting interior defensive lineman on the trade market for scheme and contract reasons. We have got a coach saying he is rebuilding chemistry with a third of the locker room being brand new. And we have got real season-ending injuries hitting right during the most sensitive week of the calendar. I am not here to tell you everything is perfect, because it is not. But I am also not here to spread panic, because this is exactly what happens every single August in the NFL. Rosters stretch, they crack a little, and the good front offices are the ones who patch the cracks before they become real holes. And if there is one thing that keeps me calm through all of this, it is that Jordan Vandenberg story. When a 6th-round kid who came out of nowhere is ready to step up, that tells you the foundation Poles built has more depth to it than it looks on paper. So here's what I am watching. Does Ryan Poles have one more move left before Sunday? Bear down, always. If this breakdown helped you out, smash that like, subscribe, and tell me down in the comments, if you were Poles, do you take a 3rd-round pick for Dexter right now, or do you wait until October? I want to read every single answer. See you in the next one.